Hello, I'm Tommy Hodges, and today we're going to be talking about Flash. If you've never used Flash before, Flash is an awesome application. You can create all different types of things, for instance, animations, cartoons, applications for your cell phone, everything. What is Flash? It's the industry-leading authoring environment for creating engaging interactive experiences created by Adobe. Flash allows you to deliver your content to audience across multiple platforms and various devices, including cell phones. Raster versus vector. Raster images will pixelate when you enlarge them, and vector images will not. That's the main thing to remember. Companies prefer their logos as a vector image rather than a raster because they can place the image on anything: side of a plane, a t-shirt, billboard, letterhead. Vector images are composed of lines and points, and then rasters are made up of pixels. So when you enlarge a raster image, you're actually enlarging the pixels. So when the pixels get bigger, the image distorts, will become blurry. If you look at this example that I have here, up at the top, well, first let's look at this guy. This is your stage. Here's where all the magic happens. Some people call it a composition, some people call it a stage. Up at the top, these individual boxes, and you can see here as well, these are your frames. Frames are individual pictures. In certain situations, when the frames are displayed in a sequential fashion, movement can be perceptually simulated. Now, the little black dots that are on these frames, these things are called keyframes, and keyframes are your basically your individual pictures, so to speak. Everything here in this area, this is your timeline. Okay, frames, keyframes, everything here, timeline. Over here, see it says snowboarder and snow hill. These are my two layers. If you look down here, you can see there's my snowboarder, here's my snow hill. Okay, if I go up to the top and look at my timeline and just move my playhead, by the way, this thing here, this is a playhead. Some people call it a time indicator. You can drag it, and as you see, as I'm going from one frame to the next, the snowboarder guy is moving slightly. This is called frame-based animation, basically. You're animating or editing one frame at a time, so you're creating a new keyframe that has information, like the size, the location, how the image is going to look for each frame, and placing these frames together and telling Flash that the frame rate is going to be a certain speed. You create motion. Frame-based animation is an animation of a series of continuous frames where the subject has changed slightly in each frame to create a continuous motion when played continuously, also known as flipbook animation. Persistence of vision means a person retains the image for a split second after the image leaves the field of view. Because of this, still images can be shown at a high rate of speed and appear as motion rather than individual images. So right now, these are individual pictures. Okay. But then when I hit return, it's showing it's showing movement. So it actually looks like our snowboarder is moving, which is really, really cool. Now as I drag the playhead from left to right, and you can see my guys moving, this is called scrubbing. So basically I'm scrubbing the track or the timeline, and I can sort of just kind of shuttle through the timeline to different times. I'm going to go to another scene that I've created. Now in this scene, I have multiple layers. Notice it says guide, boulder, snowboarder, and snow hill. Here's my snowboarder, here's my snow hill, and this is my guide. Okay, I've created a path. Vector animation. Animation where the movement is defined by computer-generated formulas to create paths of movement. They generally have a small file size with clean images. that will not pixelate when enlarged. Path animation. An object follows a path during the animation. And what's really neat is that I can tell Flash to make an object follow a path, which is awesome. So watch this. Notice that as I scrub the track, you'll noticing a white boulder that's following my path. See that? This is called path animation. Another thing I want to point out, if you look at the timeline, my boulder layer, notice that it has one keyframe here, and then another one here, and this long line. Well, I'm basically telling Flash right now that I want to create a tween. In other words, I don't want to create individual keyframes, one frame at a time, like on the snowboarder layer. Instead, I'm saying, hey, on this particular frame, I'm going to add a keyframe, and my boulder is going to be located here. On this keyframe, I'm going to reposition my boulder, and it's going to be here. And I'm telling it to follow I'm telling the boulder to follow this path. So if we go back to that first keyframe, it's on the path, and now it's following the path. And I'm also telling it to rotate, which is actually very, very convenient. Tweening generates keyframes, so you do not have to animate one frame at a time. Flash has two. It has shape tween and motion tween. Another thing, when you're working in Flash, let's say you're importing images into Flash, Photoshop will take anything. JPEGs, Photoshop documents, GIFs. You can even make your own GIFs inside Flash. Let's say, for instance, and by the way, when you're importing things into Flash, simple file import to the library. That's where you want to keep your images. And you can go to Window, Library, and inside the library, here are my images. My dude border. Awesome name, right? Yeah. And GFX boulder. Now, if I'm ready to put this on the web or show it to a friend, I can go to File, Export, Export Movie. Down at the bottom where it says Format, I have Flash, QuickTime. Yeah, when you're working with animation, you can send it out as a video. So QuickTime would be the best bet, for video. Animated GIFs. I can even send it out as a JPEG, GIF, or PNG sequence, which means that I'm sending out the individual frames as pictures inside a folder. In case you wanted to bring them into Photoshop and do something to them in Photoshop, you could do it that way. You can import that GIF sequence into Photoshop. Or maybe into another video editor. Maybe the video editor doesn't accept QuickTime. Maybe it doesn't accept SWFs. And by the way, when you save it as a Flash file, it gives you this extension, SWF, which stands for SWIFT. And let me correct myself. Some people call this animated GIF. Some will say GIF. So tomato, tomato. So I could export this thing out as a Flash movie. Decide where I'm going to save it. And then save. It'll ask me what version of Flash, and this is kind of important, especially when you're making something for the web and you want everyone to be able to see it and on their using their personal web browser. I never like to use the latest Flash player. So on my computer, the latest one that I have is Flash 9. I tell my students never ever use the latest. Always go down a few. That way everybody's computer can see it. You can determine the quality of the JPEGs, the bitmap images that you have, and I can hit OK. And one more thing, it will accept audio. So if you wanted to embed audio into this Flash movie, you could do that, which is really neat. And it's done. Bandwidth is the amount of data that can be transmitted. The more data that's being transmitted off your websites, a lot of hosts will charge more money for it. Bandwidth is really important because you have to consider who's looking at your website, um, and you want to make sure that everybody can see it. Someone with a high-speed connection obviously can handle a larger website that has more that has bigger files that'll take more time to view. If you were on like a dial-up connection. So there's something to think about when you're working on a website. The size of your composition is always important. Obviously, the larger your file size, the larger your stage size. This thing. Generally, the bigger the file is going to be. So when you're working with animations that are going to go on the web, you want to think about bandwidth issues and making sure that your files aren't too big. And speaking of that, streaming. Your browser is playing a file off the web without you having to wait for it to be completely downloaded. So going back to the bandwidth, remember when you're watching something online, that data is being transferred from that server somewhere to your computer, and your computer is allowing you to see the video or listen to the audio because it's streaming. So the computer doesn't have to completely download the entire file before you can start watching, which is really nice. But once again, since it is streaming, it's eating up the bandwidth. You're taking in data, so you've got to have the bandwidth. Streaming rate. How much data is being transferred to a browser at any given amount of time? The streaming rate is how much data is being transferred to a browser at any given amount of time. Flash file formats. .fla. This is the project file format for Flash. And the .swf, also known as SWIF, is the standard Flash file format for the web. Plugins add features to browsers. Some examples of plugins would be like Flash, Acrobat Reader, and Java. Players allow you to watch and hear video and audio. Some examples of players are Flash players, the Windows Media Player, QuickTime Player. Thanks for watching. For ExplorTech Career Tech, I'm Tommy Hodges.